There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thanks for being here. That's enough talk about Florida. Let's talk about Missouri. So, did I hear you say an answer or two ago that your children were graduates of the University of Missouri?
Can I get an MIZ back there? I don't know.
All right. Awesome. There you go. I'm feeling a lot better now, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask you about the pacing threat. You mentioned just a second ago the pacing threat, the pacing scenario. So, the Secretary of Defense has designated China as the department's pacing threat, PACOM as the pacing theater, the priority theater, and then the Taiwan contingency is the pacing contingency. Let me just ask you first off, do you agree with those designations?
I don't see anybody more dangerous, more committed to attacking U.S. interests in those areas than the President's defined.
Very good. And do you agree that the threat of a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan is something that we need to be concerned about this decade in the 2020s, not just 2030 and beyond?
I think the observables show that there's a clear indication that they are moving in that direction very rapidly.
So let me ask you this then. Would you commit to making it your top priority to ensure that the Space Force is ready to help deter China from aggression in PACOM generally, and then specifically with regard to the pacing scenario in Taiwan? Would Space Force be ready? Would you help them get ready to make sure we're able to deter a Chinese invasion of Taiwan?
If confirmed as the Chief of Space Operations, there will be no higher priority than maintain the readiness of our force to meet all of those contingencies, the Chinese threat first amongst them.
Very good. Thank you for that. Let me ask you a bit more specifically. What kind of space capabilities do you think would need to be prioritized in order to deter a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan? I mean, walk us through your thinking there.
I look at this, sir, from a two-pronged approach. We have to be able to protect the capabilities that are enabling our joint force today, whether it's navigation and timing, whether it's satellite communications, the missile warning architectures that provide indications of warning of attack. The structure of our joint force is built presuming we have access to those space capabilities. We must preserve them. That requires a shift to a more resilient, defendable architecture to provide that level of mission resiliency that we need. But it's also important to realize that the joint force is under a threat umbrella by space-enabled capabilities of our adversaries. And they will not be able to meet their military objectives if we allow the Chinese in particular to use the space-enabled targeting capabilities that they have at their disposal. So in order to be deterrent, to prevent this from going into a war that extends into space, we will have to be resilient, and we will have to have the offense and defensive capability necessary to create a credible deterrent force.
You mentioned resiliency several times now, so let me just ask you, do you think that we are currently resilient enough in space, and in particular, resilient enough to absorb losses from China or Russia in a conflict with either?
I think the best way to state that is the current attacks that we are seeing are not sufficient to take out our capabilities. We are resilient on today. As soon as we go into a crisis contingency, I do not believe we have designed our systems to operate in that level of contested environment. And so we need to change to a more defendable architecture to account for the fact that space has shifted from a benign environment to a more contested warfighting domain.
What's a more defendable architecture look like?
I think we can look at some of the observations we're seeing in Ukraine, that a distributed architecture where there are more satellites with proliferated missions that's harder to attack. Big single satellites are much easier to attack than a distributed, proliferated constellation of capabilities. It becomes a tougher targeting problem.
Let me ask you this. In your personal opinion, does the United States have the anti-satellite weapons that we need, whether that's to deter China or Russia, or if necessary to defeat them should deterrence fail?
I think the best way to answer that is for the current conditions, I think we have suitable capabilities. But I think the security situation is changing dynamically, and I'd really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you in a classified environment on the specific details.
Let me ask you just more broadly, if you are confirmed, what steps would you take to ensure that we're doing everything that we've got to do in order to improve our counter space capabilities?
If confirmed as CSO, I will lean on the force design architecture role that Congress has given to the Chief of Space Operations. We're doing force design analysis. This is rigorous data analytics that show what one constellation against a modeled threat would do, and we run thousands of permutations to really see what the optimal configuration is. I'm committed to continue doing that so that we can, one, buy the systems we need and not be overly redundant or have too little resilience in the face of the adversary.
Very good. General, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.